Good day to you, students. Welcome to Chapter 25, Lesson 5. I'm calling it Part 1 because I tried to put it all in a day and I'm running out of time. So we're splitting this guy into 2 lessons. Today is Part 1. So Lesson 5 is so long because it's pretty much the history of India, Asia, and Africa after World War II. So that's like 1945 to now for 3 different continents. Yeah. India is a subcontinent, so sure. So it's a lot, but we'll chug through it. We'll take 2 days, as I mentioned. There are a lot of complex rivalries that we'll go to between nationalists, communists, different ethnic groups like Hindus and Muslims. It's all pretty messy. We'll even learn why one country has 2 different names and why people call them the 2 different names. So you can drop that knowledge in your dinner table and you'll sound super sophisticated. Okay, alright, here's us chugging through the lesson. Let's get to it. Okay, so as we recall from long, long ago, before spring break and all that jazz, India has been ruled by Britain since the 1700s. After that uprising, remember, by the Indian military, that were working for the British, and then the East India Company was in charge, and now Britain is taking charge of the whole thing, the government. You had the Raj formed, which was the British government ruling India. They were efficient, and they did things like improve roads and infrastructure, but they weren't very good to the Indian people. Remember, they had them grow cotton instead of food, and then a bunch of people starved. So they kind of more or less subjugated the Indian people, and as a result, you had a lot of prominent Indians forming the INC, the Indian National Congress. Some of them didn't mind the Brits being in charge as soon as they, as long as Indians had a say in government. And let's pick up there. After World War I, anti-British sentiments and protests swept through India. Their most famous leader was a guy mostly just known by Gandhi, who used non-violent civil disobedience. Basically, his followers held strikes and boycotted British goods, but they weren't violent, even though they were arrested multiple times. Now, fast forward after World War II, the British knew they could no longer control India, but giving them their independence would be tricky because bitter conflicts divided the majority Hindu population with a large minority population of Muslims. So in 1947, India and Pakistan were created, and it was a mess. You see, there was basically 2 land masses that were Pakistan. You had West Pakistan and East Pakistan, where the Muslims would live, and then all the Hindus would live in India. And so when the split happened, you had all the Muslims living here, moving into the Pakistans, and then all the Hindus living in the Pakistans, rushing into India to be with their own people, and fighting broke out, and like 1 million people died. I don't know too much on the subject, but, well, the tension between Muslim Pakistan and Hindu India still persists to this day. We'll talk about that in a moment. Now, tensions between Pakistan and India boiled over. They fought over a region known as Kashmir, located in the north here, and they ended up fighting with India taking control of most of that Kashmir region. In 1971, you have East Pakistan, right over here, form its own new country. So they break from independent, so no longer one country separated, West and East Pakistan. East Pakistan becomes Bangladesh. Alright, shoot forward to the 80s, and India and Pakistan are still fighting over Kashmir, but this time they have nukes, they have nuclear weapons. The world is fearful that 2 nations will start a nuclear winter. However, nuclear winter did not occur. This was the height of the Cold War. Nukes were a problem. Terrorism still persists between the nations and is an issue, but in general, as it stands today, 2017, relations between India and Pakistan are improving. For example, we're not on the brink of nuclear war between the 2 nations anymore. Now, moving back to India from Pakistan, or the Pakistans, India is freed from British rule and initially led by the Indian National Congress, renamed the Congress Party. The first Prime Minister of India was Jawaharlal Nehru. Now, his close ally was Gandhi, the guy we talked about, but Gandhi was assassinated in 1948. Nehru was a British educated lawyer, and he worked to modernize the country by strengthening the economy and building industry. He also started the Green Revolution by making more farmland available. Remember, they had those starvation problems from growing too much cotton? Not under this president, not under this leadership of the Congress Party. They're definitely going to grow enough food. By 1979, India was growing enough food to feed the whole country. They didn't have to import food anymore. Now, Nehru died in 1964, but his daughter continued his work. But she was assassinated in 1984. So her son ends up becoming prime minister, and he too gets assassinated, this time in 1989. So as the country was struggling politically, their leaders keep getting assassinated. The country moved in the 90s and started to reduce the role of government in the economy, basically deregulating and having the private sector control more of the industry, and it created an economic boom. And as a result, today India is one of the fastest growing economies in the world. They work a lot in high-tech technology and software. Now, Southeast Asia. After World War II, colonial rule of Asia for the most part ended. But the struggle between communist and non-communist forces would create struggle and problems within the region. For example, in 1945, Ahmed Sukarno and his nationalists declared the East Indies free from Dutch rule. Who are the Dutch? There's no country of Dutch land. It's the Netherlands. Hint, hint. All right, so they were saying, we're free now. We're no longer the Dutch East Indies. We're Indonesia now. And at first the Dutch were all like, what you talking about, fool? They did not approve of this. They did not approve of this. But when the communists within Indonesia staged a revolt, the Dutch backed the nationalist government run by Sukarno. I guess they were more happy with a nationalist Indonesia than communist Indonesia, so they just kind of bit the bullet on that one. There's Sukarno. So after Sukarno, let's talk about Sukarno first. Sukarno did a good deal to unite the islands of Indonesia. You'll see it's a whole bunch of different islands, and a lot of them contain different ethnic groups. So how do you form a whole bunch of different people on different islands into a single sort of a unit, a nation? Well, he developed a common language that kind of placed them all on equal footing, and that was good. However, Sukarno became a dictator pretty soon. He sort of took away the power of the legislature there in Indonesia, became a dictator, and that's never really good for a country. The prices for food and other goods skyrocketed, and so the communists tried to take over again in 1965. But they failed, and then the army of Indonesia went on to basically kill 300,000 communists and suspected communists. It was this time in 65 that Sukarno was replaced by a new dictator, an anti-communist General Suharto. In 1998, Suharto fell from power. It's not even that long ago, and a democracy was formed in 2004, the year Mr. Young graduated from high school. Alright, so Indonesia, big changes up until not really that long ago. Now they're a democracy, so that's good. Alright, Myanmar and Malaysia. In 1848, where are we at on time? 8:40. Alright, in 1848, Burma was freed from British rule. In 1962, under military rule, Burma became a socialist country, so you might call them communist light. With the government, of course, being a socialist government taking control of the nation's industry. In the 90s, the government said they were going to hold elections, and kind of did, but like they arrested the Democratic leader, who was the opposition party, and then she went on to win the election, but she was in jail, so the government didn't recognize her as the winner, and so the military state that ruled Myanmar persisted. They decided to rename the country from Burma to Myanmar, so that's its new name, Myanmar. Now, some nations to this day refuse to recognize Myanmar as the name of the country and still call it Burma as a recognition that it's a military state, and they don't recognize the legitimacy of this military state that changed the name, therefore they still call it Burma. So when you call it Burma, it's a slight against the Myanmar government, and if you call it Myanmar, it's kind of like you're being soft on the Myanmar military state. Does that make sense? I hope so. All right, so Burma, Myanmar, you see different things on different maps, or different countries call it different things. When President Obama called it Myanmar, people were like, oh, he should have called it Burma. You shouldn't recognize that military state. And they're free to feel that way. I still call them Burma. All right, over in the Malay Peninsula, another little chunk of Asia, they gained their freedom from Britain as well. In 1963, the freed territories of the Malay Peninsula formed the Federation of Malaysia. However, the city of Singapore, that was a part of this, broke free and formed its own nation in 1965, and that's why Singapore is its own country. All right, that's a whole lot for today, so we're going to call it there. We're still going to talk about Asia tomorrow because we still have to talk about the mess that is Vietnam. And the French were in Vietnam fighting, and then the U.S. would be in Vietnam fighting. A lot of you might have grandparents that fought in Nam. So we'll talk about that mess. And then we also talk about Africa. So for today, there's a quiz, 5 questions, 10 points, but it's only on what we went over today. Tomorrow we'll have a separate assessment. I just don't know if it's going to be a quiz or an assignment yet. We'll see. So go ahead and knock out the quiz. You get it 2 attempts. That's it for today. If you have any questions, please let me know. If you want to learn more about Burma/Myanmar, you can just Google it or ask me. There's all kinds of details we skipped over. All right, have a good one.